Broadcasting live from our satellite studios in Dallas, Texas, it's time for the special on-the-road edition of Learning Insights, featuring learning professionals who are improving performance and driving business results.
Welcome back to another exciting and informative edition of Learning Insights. Lee Cantor, Stone Payton here. Also, our friends at Training Pros. We have Pam Porter in the studio with us again, satellite studio here in Dallas. But in this segment, we're going to get a chance to visit with a guy who knows a thing or two about transformative learning, coaching, high potential leadership development programs. Got a lot on his plate. Looking forward to this conversation. Please join me in welcoming to the studio Mr. Ed Rankin. How are you, man?
I'm great, thank you.
So, Ed, we were talking earlier before the segment began about high potentials. What's your thoughts on getting the most out of them?
Well, I think that beyond the development aspects of high potential training programs, I think one of the things that we don't think about or we fail to acknowledge is that the benefit or the side benefit of these programs in terms of retention. And I think also too one of the missed opportunities is when someone is released from a formal training program, there's a lack of follow through, and so. One of the things that I think works really well with high potentials, and there's a lot of research around this, is the implementation of group coaching programs as follow-on, sort of to continue the learning experience for those who've gone through the formal training program experience.
So they start out, the coaching begins as an individualized one-on-one, and they move to a group setting?
Well, what's worked well for me has been when we've done our leadership development programs and a formal program that's sort of multimodal, multimedia, experiential, with kind of a combination of individual learning and group learning, and with a lot of assessment, so we understand where the individual and the group are both when they come into the program. So we can
kind of have a baseline before they begin,
right? And we can then kind of craft our curriculum to meet the needs of both the group and the individual so that the learning is very efficient. Mm-hmm. But what we've done, so we've incorporated coaching as a part of the learning process. So, we'll have our classroom experiences. We'll have individually assigned digital learning, online learning experiences, group work, case studies, things like that. But then there's also an individual coaching protocol that takes place while they're in the program. One of the things I think that's worked pretty well, which I sort of discovered by accident, was once the cohort graduates, then to offer them ongoing group coaching, which has an effect, I think, of keeping the group together a little bit, but also helps them continue to be able to put their learning to work. And
it helps them stay compliant with whatever they learn. And so
and if what we've learned about coaching, one of the reasons coaching works is because it takes place over time. And, all of us, especially some of those who are, my age, have a lot of experience attending 2 and 3 day workshops. They're very intense. And
you're like, wow, that was great.
It was great. And you go back and you
I got a folder, put it on my bookshelf, and then.
Exactly.
What was that thing I learned 6 months ago?
Exactly. And I think one of the things that's been missing has been sort of the coaching process, which is still linked to the individual's learning objectives, so they continue to be able to continue their learning, and you can actually continue to tailor that as they move through. But and then one of the things that we've done is we've looped those back so that the graduates of cohort 1 become mentors for the participants of cohort 2.
Oh, that's a cool
idea. But that's built into
that.
So you're managing their expectations, so they know that going in.
Yes.
That this is part of an ongoing program. You're going to, after you graduate, then you'll become a mentor for the next group.
Correct. And if you look at the great thinkers of leadership, one of the real responsibilities of a leader is to be a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, and it again, it's another reinforcement of the learning that took place while they were when group cohort 1 was in their active learning program. This is becoming a mentor now to cohort 2, helps to continue to reinforce that all that formal learning and exposure that they were given.
Now, are you finding that companies are doing a good job right now in identifying high potentials and kind of coaching them up?
I don't think so at all. I think that I think the identification process that most companies follow and to identify high potentials misses a lot of people. The criteria, because you have to look at how the whole process is set up.
Right. So how are they doing it now?
Well, I think that and practically speaking, what I see is executives picking particularly favored members of their team that they want to promote or be seen as more promotable, sort of individually selecting those, promoting those people to, whoever the final selection board or committee might be. That's a big part of it. And there's a lot of pressure. I was in one situation where recruits, because the organization's high potential program was highly regarded, that executives were making commitments up front to high potential recruits that they would get admission to their high potential program if they accepted the opportunity.
We're going to give you the golden ticket.
Correct. Right. And so I think that's so I think there's a lot of flaws in there. And most of the time these programs are not really linked back to the longer term corporate strategy, I think.
So what's a better way to do it?
Well, I think, first of all, looking at what the company's long-term strategy is and trying to see where the holes might be. And, there are a lot of really good tools that aren't being used out there in terms of succession management, succession planning. There's a lot of good models that most companies aren't following. Mm-hmm. So, I think beyond, the names on an org chart on the wall, there's a little more sophisticated approaches that could be taken, really looking at, again, it's oversimplification to say it this way, but if you look at what the company's long and short-term strategies might be, look at what the existing bench strength is, and then trying to figure out where are the holes and who do we have internally that might be able to fill those roles. Mm-hmm. What are the potential? What is their promotability, and what are the potential timelines for that to happen? But as we all know, most companies aren't approaching it as sophisticated.
But is this something that you think that they should be kind of doing assessments for more people to cast a wider net so that you don't miss some of the people that maybe aren't obvious choices?
Well, one of the things that I've seen work best is to make sure that there's a self-nomination component and leave that open. And so we've seen some people that were overlooked by management, particularly in one organization. They were particularly they were sort of an egalitarian management approach anyway, so this fit well within how they manage their business. But we tried it both ways. We had it once where it was all self-nomination, and then the second time we did it was all management.
And it was the exact same people both times?
No, actually, no. What happened was the third time we did it, we said, we think we missed some people,
right, because
of management's preconceived ideas and just the way that people went about choosing because of the reasons for selecting certain people for high potential programs. Maybe because they were concerned they might lose someone, or they right. So it wasn't necessarily.
And I would think there's some just an inherent bias of the leadership. Like people like themselves. So you might miss maybe minorities or people of different genders just because you're not looking in that direction.
No question. And when we had a combination of self-nomination and management nomination, I think that was probably the best.
That was the most effective.
Yeah, because we picked up some people through the self-nomination process that would probably been missed, and as it turned out, so were some of the best participants.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to know more about your backstory. Go ahead, you can get you a swig of water.
Okay.
Well, you get you a swig of water, though. I just, because your work sounds fascinating to me. It sounds like it must be an awful lot of fun, very rewarding. But I'd be interested, and I think our listeners might too, your backstory, a little bit about how you got to this place.
Oh, it's perhaps.
You get to choose how far back you go. You get to self-nominate.
Okay.
How far back you go.
Self-nomination.
I was born in Rex Hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina. I characterize myself as a recovering entrepreneur, and I had a company that I started literally in a one-room executive suite office over here in Las Colinas back in '94. And 3 or 4 years later, I looked up and I had 40 or 50 people working for me, and we're doing $3 or $4 million a year in revenue. And so I kept that business for a total of 10 years, sold it 10 years ago. And as I was looking around thinking about what I would do next, this whole field of succession management kept coming up. I've been fortunate in my company that I had exposure to a lot of thought leaders in the HR world, and people kept suggesting that, while with your background and experience you've had, perhaps this leadership development, succession management area would be a good place to put some focus. So that's what I did, and I elected to go back to school. I finished a one-year graduate course and coaching, and then I rolled that over into a doctoral program. So I'm writing my dissertation now. Hopefully in January I'll be have earned a PhD in human and organizational systems.
And then maybe you can get a job.
Yeah, maybe I can get a job.
You get a paying job.
No, unfortunately, I think I'm condemned to the entrepreneurial world.
So is the prospectus, has it been approved, or how far?
Yeah, well, I have my and this university that I'm attending, we have a what's called a concept paper. So my concept paper's been approved.
Sweet.
Just yesterday, my pilot study was signed off on by one of my faculty, my committee members. So I'm looking at a January graduation, I hope, unless some other unforeseen things get thrown.
So are you allowed to talk about what you're going to be studying or researching? Or?
Well, the topic of my dissertation, broadly speaking, is really around belief formation. It's how people come to believe what they believe, and it's a very, very complex issue.
Yeah,
quite honestly, because our beliefs are formed by a variety of different factors, and so teasing those out about how we come to believe what we believe, and it's connected directly to what I do when I do coaching, because a lot of people's beliefs about themselves and about others really what impact how they get their job done or don't get their job done. Most of the work I do is in corporations, coaching stuff.
So now when you do your work in corporations, they're telling you, hey, fix Bob, or is Bob coming up to you and saying, hey, I need a coach because I want to do better?
Sometimes it's a little of both. What's good about coaching is that, even probably as recently as a decade ago, a lot of coaching was used for remediation.
Right.
A lot of people, coaching was something that you offered to someone before
you fired him.
Right.
Yeah. If you got a coach, that was like, oh no, I got a coach.
Right.
Last resort. You better start looking.
Right. And now actually it's interesting.
Now it's a perk. Right?
It is very definitely a perk. It's very definitely a perk, and it's really interesting to see how it grows. I was engaged by several years ago. I was engaged by executive vice president of he was a $1 billion division of a Japanese corporation, and he engaged me directly through a referral. And he was new in a role, and he had some hesitations about some things, and really felt like he needed to think through it. But anyway, we worked together for a few months, and it went well. And he asked me to come back and work with all three of his senior vice presidents, which I did. And then they asked me to come back and work with all of their vice presidents.
Wow.
Which I did. So what happens? It's exactly what happened, because through some of the information gathering techniques that I do, trying to learn about people, 360s and other things, people say, well, "What's this all about?" Well, why is he getting it and I'm not getting it? I want some of this.
But that's interesting, because they don't take it as like a weakness. They're not saying, "Oh, he's trying to fix me." They're looking at it as, "Look, I'm going to be better because I'm going through this."
That's great.
Well, I think it's become accepted as a learning tool, and that you mentioned earlier, transformative learning was mentioned here, and that's really I think what many of my coaching clients are seeking. They're seeking to be transformed in some way by. They're looking for some way to transform,
right?
And one-on-one coaching is a very good way of accomplishing that. It's very precise. Coaching is a very efficient way of growth. Actually, it's, I think, probably the most efficient way to grow.
Can you share a little bit of what does that first session look like? Is that typically over the phone, in person?
Ideally, it's in person. You get to read a lot, and I think it's an important part of sort of creating chemistry with someone. I just had a session the other day with a woman who's top marketing communications person for a large company here in the Dallas area, and she's had some challenges getting adjusted to height. It's a new company, relatively new company, high profile, a lot of money, a lot of pressure, and a lot of change. And so,
so she engaged you for herself personally, or the company?
The company's most of the time the company foots the bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, so what does that first session look like? How do you kind of get the lay of the land and seeing the best way to help her?
Really with her, it was we jumped right into it. We were
so she's
coaching.
Like, I have this challenge. This is keeping me up at night.
Right. Yeah, we jumped right into it, and I started working with her in a coaching mode. From within.
Is that unusual?
That's pretty typical, because what I want to do, it's actually a good part of us figuring out whether we're going to work well together. He or she can determine whether I have the skills and the ability to help them, and then I can help. Can I assess whether it's that I can indeed help them? So it's a really good way for us to kind of figure out to work with one another.
How long does it take before the person being coached knows if this is a good fit or not? Is it something like at the end of that hour? Should I expect to be changed in some manner?
I think certainly at the end of the hour, you should have a very strong sense of whether that coach can help you. If you don't feel that strongly about it at the end of an hour, then you probably need to continue to look.
And a good coach is going to know too, right? A good coach is going to know if the right chemistry is there or not.
Yeah, and I'm of the opinion that a good coach can really work with anyone. I think there are people out there that say, "Well, I have to have a," and I'm not so sure sometimes that the potential coachee or the client is really the best person to decide. No, seriously, because sometimes it may not feel good.
Right.
It may not be comfortable. In fact, if a coach is doing his or her job, then sometimes they may be putting their client in a place that they're not comfortable being, but that's part of what you should be doing, is challenging your client.
Right, because if every time the client pulls the plug when it gets hard or it's painful, then they're not going to grow, right?
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, likely, yeah.
So what's next for you? You're going to write a book? You're going to do, I know,
Well,
you're going to get your
his
doctorate.
PhD.
Right?
Well,
what else you want the guy to do?
Actually, there are probably a couple of books that'll probably spin out of this doctorate, and I have some other things that, because of the volume of research that you have to do in order to do a good dissertation, it's like starting out boiling the ocean, and then you end up with a little tiny crucible of stuff. And that little crucible of stuff is something that you and only a handful of people in the world really know about or even care about. And so, so in the process of getting to the dissertation, which I'm getting there now, I've uncovered a lot of other things that were interesting to me.
And a lot of cool stuff you can go work on as soon as you get done with your dissertation.
A lot of cool stuff I can go work on when I get done. But I actually think there's some things out there that I'd like to write about and to get clear about in myself, in my own mind, and maybe some books that will come out of that, yeah.
So it sounds to me like this may be absolutely a non-issue, but I'm always curious, how does the sales and marketing aspect of this thing work? For like a practice like yours, you built up a business, you mentioned earlier. So like if you're wanting to go out and continue to do this kind of work, how does the sales and marketing piece work? Are you just at a point in your career that the phone rings, or do you have to develop like an approach to go out and how does that or do you know yet?
Well, no, that's a really good question.
I thought it took me a minute to get it out, but I thought it was a fantastic question.
That's a very good question. Well, and I think that's a question that majority of coaches struggle with. And there's a lot of fluff out there in the coaching community and the coaching profession about finding your ideal client. That's the one thing that a lot of coaches hear a lot about. When you're in your training and coaching, you really need to be clear about what kind of person you want to work with and where are they going to be and where you're going to find them, and you need to go hang out in those places, all that stuff. Fortunately for me, I've been at it a while, and as I've developed a reference list, and I have a lot of work that comes to me through referrals, and just because of people that know of me and know me or know of me. But I think that being on the radio doesn't hurt. I think there are a lot of ways that publishing articles, getting it's that unpaid media, is a good way.
So this thought leadership, this continuing to contribute to the profession with stuff that you can. So that's a part. sounds like.
Oh yeah, and writing. I was asked to write the accrediting body for coaches. The preeminent accrediting body for coaches is the International Coach Federation, and they have a
must be true because he's the second guy to say that. So.
Well, yeah, right. You say it often enough, right, and it becomes true.
We're going to send ICF a bill.
Yeah, you should.
That's 2 interviews now.
You should, but I was asked by them to make some contributions to their blog that's on their global website, and I presented at a couple of conferences and things like that.
And you also do good work, so that helps
that's
too,
not
right?
a bad sales tool, right?
That's a good.
Yeah,
sales.
I think if I can't imagine being in coaching for any reason other than you really just enjoy it. I mean, there's nothing more enjoyable to me than sitting across the table or in a chair from someone and helping them with a really important career or life decision. It's just the most rewarding thing you can do, and to
it's
watch.
a passion too, isn't it?
Well, it is with me, and I think that it's just. I can't imagine doing anything that's more rewarding, fulfilling. In fact, there are probably things that I could go do where I could make a lot more money. But when people ask me all the time, "What would you really want to do?" I say, "Well, I really just want to coach. I mean, I'd love to. I could do that all. Although it's probably one of the most physically demanding things I've done."
Now, I have a question. We were talking earlier about high potentials. Can you talk a little bit about if any of this can translate maybe to younger people, and so we don't lose some kids early on? That, in my view, everybody has a chance. They have potential, right? And in the school system, some people fall through the cracks and don't get opportunities and get chances. And you mentioned as part of your dissertation belief, and I was wondering if some of that would come into play at a young age.
There's a wonderful guy and a very interesting guy here in Dallas. His name is Eddie Dean. If you've ever been to a barbecue event in downtown Dallas, Eddie Dean's, he's a caterer. He catered President Bush's white dinner at the barbecue at the White House's inauguration. Catered both Governor Bush's inaugurals in Austin. He just catered Governor Abbott's inaugural celebration in Austin. I've come to know Eddie recently, and Eddie does a tremendous amount. In addition to making good barbecue and having a really good business, he does a lot of work with homeless, and he does a lot of work with kids. And Eddie has an idea. He said, these kids they're like ships without pilots. And he said many of these homeless people are ships without pilots, and does a lot of work with vets, PTSD, etc. He and I had a 2-hour conversation the other day about this very thing, and so I think that and he and I both agree that there's sort of a crisis of consciousness in our world, and self-awareness is a lot of what we do in coaching, and we help people raise their level of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. I think as far as kids are concerned, or young people coming up, I think that being aware, being conscious of who you are, and making sure that you are the pilot of your ship. And a lot of kids lose that pilot. And they lose it through tragedy, and they lose it through abuse. These are things Eddie has identified in all his work. He's a really interesting guy. I mean, he went to Texas A&M, grew up in East Texas, just kind of cowboy boot wearing kind of guy. He grew up on a working ranch and just in East Texas, but a very, very, very bright guy. And just through his experience and just watching people, has learned a lot of things that are very valid. So he and I are going to collaborate on some things.
Right.
I told him the other day, I said, Eddie, there's a lot of academic support for the ideas that you're holding, but in a way, that's what coaching is doing, is bringing in this academic, theoretical stuff to practical stuff. How do you take what we know about human behavior and psychology and consciousness, and how do we bring that together to help people
and change their behavior and change their lives?
Their behavior and change their lives. Absolutely, yeah. And that's back to that transformative learning, right? So someone can be truly transformed through learning. Eddie has a bicycle that he calls it his wrong way bicycle. If you turn the bicycle to the right, the wheel goes to the left. You turn the bicycle to the left, the wheel goes to the right. And he said I've offered people as much as $10,000 to ride my bicycle. He said because our brains, he's just a good, smart, practical guy. Our brains have learned to to interact with the world in a certain way. So it's his way of demonstrating to people that it's the hardwiring, and you need to change the hardwiring. And and we talked earlier about coaching. That's really kind of what coaching does. Over time, we can change that hardwiring in someone's brain in terms of how they think about the world, how they interact with other people, even how their beliefs about themselves.
And you're going to bring his bike now when you start working for these companies? Well, make the executives ride around the parking lot?
We're early stages now, but yeah, Eddie's got some great ideas, I think, about some things that make a lot of sense. And his question to me was, how do we? He wants to really take some of his thinking and really help kids primarily, and homeless and others. And I said, I think there's a real need in the corporate world for some of this stuff. So we're talking about how we might do some things there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody wants to learn more about your work, you have a website?
Yeah, it's edwinrankin.com.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for being part of the program.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it a lot.
All right. We'll be back in a few from the conference room at Training Pros Dallas.
This has been a Special Business Radio X production, brought to you by Training Pros, your source for local learning and development experts. Learn more at training-pros.com.